A ruthless millionaire marched his 4-year-old son out of the car and into the cold mountain air like he was dropping off an unwanted package, not a child. The boy's tiny hand clung to his father's expensive coat sleeve, his breathing shallow and fast, his chest already struggling the way it always did when the air was thin. The man didn't slow down. He didn't bend. He didn't look back. The wind bit at the boy's cheeks, but it didn't hurt as much as the words he had heard earlier that day. "He's too sick, he'll ruin everything." When the man finally pulled his arm free and walked back toward the black SUV, the boy's weak voice broke the silence. "Dad, please, I can't breathe." The millionaire kept walking. He slammed the car door shut and turned the key. Gravel crunched under the tires. Snowflakes began to fall, soft and uncaring. As the vehicle rolled away, the boy dropped to his knees, one hand on his chest. He watched the red brake lights blink once in the distance, as if the car itself was asking, "Are you sure?" Then the lights disappeared around the bend. The boy was alone. His heart thudded unevenly in his chest. His lungs felt tight, tears blurred his vision. That was when he heard it, an engine, not the smooth, deep growl of his father's luxury car, but a rough, uneven rumble from somewhere higher up the mountain road. It got louder, closer. Something was coming, something his father did not expect. And what happened next would break hearts years later when the truth finally came out. Before we dive into this story, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to where all of this started, because this cruel moment in the mountains did not happen by accident. Years before that cold day, the millionaire was not just a rich man. His name was Carter Hayes, and in his city people spoke his name with a mix of respect and fear. He owned construction companies, tech buildings, and half of the shiny glass towers in downtown. His picture was on magazine covers. His face was on business news channels. People called him the man who never loses. Carter liked that. He liked control. He liked numbers that always went up. He liked deals that always worked in his favor. What he did not like was weakness. He grew up in a tiny house with a father who always coughed and a mother who always begged for help from neighbors. Carter had watched them struggle, and he promised himself he would never live that way. He would never depend on anyone. He would never allow weakness in his life again. When he was young and poor, he thought money would solve everything. When he became rich, he believed he had proved himself right. So when his wife, a gentle kindergarten teacher named Riley, told him she was pregnant, he felt something close to joy, but only because he imagined a strong son, a future leader for the Hayes Empire. At first, everything looked perfect. Little clothes hung in the nursery, tiny shoes lined up in a row. Carter even stood in the doorway one night with a small smile, imagining teaching his boy how to win in life. When the baby was born, they named him Eli. He had soft, dark hair, big brown eyes, and a quiet way of looking at the world, like he was already trying to understand it. But it didn't take long for something to feel wrong. Eli cried differently. He didn't just fuss, he gasped like each breath was a task. When Riley carried him up the stairs, his lips sometimes turned a pale blue. He tired quickly. He didn't run across the yard like other kids. He walked in short bursts, then stopped, pressing his small hand to his chest. Riley took him to doctors, then specialists, then even more specialists. Carter signed the payment forms without looking at the prices because he assumed money would fix it. Money fixed everything, but this time it didn't. One afternoon, a calm doctor with gray hair and tired eyes sat them down in a quiet hospital office. "Your son has a congenital heart condition," he said gently. "He was born with it. His heart is not formed the way it should be." Riley's hand flew to her mouth. Carter's jaw tight. The doctor explained how Eli's heart worked harder than normal, how he would get tired quicker, how some activities would be dangerous, how he might need surgery. "Can you fix it?" Carter asked, his voice low. "We can help," the doctor said. "We can manage, but there is no simple cure. He will always need extra care, extra protection." The word extra felt like an insult to Carter. Extra care, extra cost, extra risk. Extra chances for people to whisper behind his back, "Did you hear about his son? Sick, weak, fragile." At first, Carter pretended it didn't bother him. He told himself he could handle it, that he would shield his family from every problem the way he shielded his companies from failure. He hired the best doctors. He ordered expensive machines and medications to be brought to the house. He told his assistant to move meetings when Eli had hospital appointments. To the outside world, it looked like a picture of strong fatherly love, but inside, something dark grew. Every time Eli coughed, Carter's chest tightened. Every time a business rival smiled too smoothly at a charity event and asked, "How is your boy doing?" Carter heard something else behind the question. He heard pity. He heard judgment. He heard, "You have everything, but your air is broken." Riley, on the other hand, saw a different story. She saw a little boy who loved drawing cars on every scrap of paper. She saw a child who would sit quietly and listen to the sounds of the city at night and say things like, "It sounds like the buildings are breathing." She learned how to hold him when his chest hurt, how to count his breaths, how to distract him with silly stories about brave animals with funny hearts. She didn't see weakness. She saw a different kind of strength, one that came from fighting for each day, but she felt her husband pulling away. Carter stopped coming home early. Late-night meetings became normal. Business trips grew longer. "I'm doing this for us," he would say when Riley asked him to stay. "I'm building something for Eli." But the truth was he didn't know how to look his son in the eyes without feeling fear and shame. One evening when Eli was 3, Riley walked into Carter's home office and found him staring at a medical report, his hand shaking slightly even though he would never admit it. "He's going to need surgery," she told him in a tired, soft voice. "The doctors say waiting is dangerous now." Carter slammed the folder closed. "Do you know how this looks?" he muttered. "Investors are watching everything. The media is always at our door. If they smell weakness, they will use it. Competitors already think I'm slipping." Riley stared at him. "Your son could die," she whispered. "And you're talking about investors." That night was the start of the final break. They screamed, they cried. Riley begged him to be present, to love their son, to stop thinking like a businessman and start thinking like a father. Carter said cruel things he could not take back. He accused her of hiding details from him. She accused him of caring more about glossy photos than the boy sleeping down the hall. Eli heard the raised voices through the wall and hugged his stuffed dinosaur tight, breathing fast again. His chest hurt, but the sound of his parents fighting hurt more. Months went by, surgery dates were pushed, meetings were prioritized. Riley did everything she could to fight for Eli's health, but she was not as powerful as the man who signed every check. Then one morning when Eli was a little over 4 years old, Carter made a decision that would change all of their lives. He woke before sunrise, dressed in dark clothes instead of his usual sharp suit, and walked down the hallway to Eli's room. The nightlight glowed softly in the corner, throwing gentle stars on the ceiling. Eli lay curled up under his blanket, breathing in short, uneven whispers. "Get up," Carter said quietly. His voice sounded strange even to himself. Eli rubbed his eyes and sat up, his small body shaking with a tiny cough. "Where are we going?" he asked, clutching his dinosaur. "For a ride," Carter said. "Just us." The boy's face brightened, then flickered with worry as he pressed his hand to his chest. "Is it far?" "You'll be fine," Carter snapped without thinking, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, buddy, it'll be an adventure." The word adventure made Eli relax a little. He slipped on his little shoes and followed his father down the hallway, his thin legs working hard to keep up. Riley was not home. She had gone to stay with her sister for a few days after another ugly fight. She thought leaving might shake Carter awake, make him realize how close he was to losing more than a company. She had no idea what plans were moving quietly in his mind while she was gone. Outside, the air was cold and still. Carter buckled Eli into the back seat of the black SUV. The city was just beginning to yawn awake. Streetlights glowed. A few early trucks rumbled by. As they drove, tall buildings gave way to shorter ones, then to open fields, then to darker shapes of hills and trees. Eli watched out the window, his hands resting on his chest like he was holding his heart in place. "Dad," he asked after a while, "why is Mom not coming?" Carter's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Your mom needed a break," he said. "She worries too much. I'm going to fix everything." "You can fix my heart?" Eli asked. There was no accusation in his voice, only hope, only trust. "I'm working on it," Carter replied. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, but inside his thoughts were a storm. In the weeks before this drive, he had spoken to someone he never should have listened to. A man at a private club, older and colder, who leaned in one evening with a cigar in his hand and said, "Some things ruin a legacy. If you can't fix a problem, remove it." Carter had laughed it off at first, but those words stuck like thorns. Remove it, remove the problem, remove the weakness. He told himself he was doing something logical, something tough but necessary. He whispered to himself that Eli would not suffer long in a world that was too hard for his kind of body. He wrapped his cruelty in lies and called it mercy and strategy. Now, as the road climbed into the mountains, the lies were the only things keeping him from turning the car around and racing back home. They drove for hours. Trees closed in on both sides. Snow started to appear in patches on the ground. Eli's breath grew shallow. "Dad," he said softly, "my chest hurts." "We're almost there," Carter muttered, "just a little longer." When he finally stopped the car, they were in a lonely area where the road was narrow and crumbling at the edges. A drop fell away on one side, disappearing into deep shadows. On the other side, tall pines stood like silent guards. The air was thinner here, colder, harsher. Carter turned off the engine. Everything went quiet. Out, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. Eli shook his head slowly. It's cold, he whispered. Please, Dad, I want to go home. This is important, Carter said. He unbuckled his son and lifted him out, setting him on the hard ground. Eli tried to stand tall, but his legs trembled. His small coat was no match for the wind. He clutched his dinosaur and looked up with wide eyes. What are we doing? Carter stepped back. Every step away from his son felt like walking through deep mud. His chest hurt, but not from sickness, from something else he refused to name. I need you to stay here, he said. Eli flinched. By myself, just for a little while, Carter lied. Someone will come. Eli's heart raced. It was harder to breathe now. He took a shaky step toward his father. Don't go, he pleaded. Please, I'll be good, I promise. I'll walk slow. I won't make you tired. I won't make you late. Every word was a small knife. Carter's jaw clenched. In his mind, he saw investors' faces, news headlines, his father's coughing body, his mother's worried eyes. He saw everything he had run from, everything he had sworn to crush. You're not the problem, he wanted to say. It's me, it's my fear. But the words never left his mouth. Ed, he did something worse. You're strong, he said with a stiff voice. If you're meant to live, you'll survive anywhere, you'll prove it. The sentence made no sense even to him, but he needed something to hold on to, some twisted excuse to walk away. Eli stared at him, confusion mixing with panic. Dad, I can't breathe good here. Carter turned. He walked toward the car. Each step felt heavier than the last. Eli's small hand grabbed the back of his coat for a moment, then slipped off. Dad. The boy called, his voice breaking. Daddy, please. Carter did not look back. He opened the car door, climbed inside, and shut it. The sound was final, like a door closing on a whole world. Through the rear window, he saw his son drop to his knees, clutching his chest. For a second, Carter's hand hovered over the door handle. For a second, he almost jumped out, ran to him, picked him up, and screamed apologies. But pride is a heavy chain when you let it wrap around your neck. He swallowed hard, turned the key, and drove away. As the car rolled forward, the boy's face shrank in the mirror, then blurred, then vanished around the bend. The farther he drove, the louder his thoughts became. This is for the best. He would have suffered anyway. The world is too cruel for someone that weak. People will stop asking questions. The company will stay strong. Your legacy will be safe. He repeated the words in his head, but they felt like ash. Back on the mountain, Eli tried to stand, tried to walk, tried to call out again. His lungs burned. His heart fluttered and pounded at the same time. Tears froze on his cheeks as the wind whipped around him. The trees seemed to lean closer, watching. The world stretched wide and empty in every direction. Fear wrapped around him like the icy air. He sat down hard and hugged his dinosaur to his chest, whispering, it's okay, even though it was. Mom will come, Mom always finds me. He didn't know that she didn't even know he was gone. The silence on that lonely road felt endless until the sound broke it. A rough, uneven engine noise echoed through the cold air, rolling down the road from somewhere above. It sputtered, coughed, then roared to life again. Eli lifted his head, eyes wide. The sound grew louder, closer, like a mechanical growl. He tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. All he could do was turn his head toward the bend in the road and squint through the thin snowfall. A rusty pickup truck appeared, old and scratched, with a dented front bumper and a bed full of ropes, tools, and what looked like an old metal toolbox. The truck's headlights cut through the dim light and swept across the small shape of the boy kneeling on the edge of the road. Inside the truck, a woman in a thick brown jacket and faded jeans gripped the steering wheel. Her name was Hannah Cole, a mountain mechanic who spent her days fixing engines no one else cared about. She was on her way home from a job, thinking about the pile of bills on her kitchen table and the college brochures her younger brother kept hidden in his drawer because he didn't want to bother her with his dreams. She was tired, her back ached, her fingers were numb from the cold. But when her headlights hit the tiny figure on the road, she slammed her foot on the brake so hard the truck skidded on the gravel. For a moment everything froze, the truck, the boy, even the snowflakes seemed to hang in the air. Hannah's heart dropped into her stomach. No, she whispered. No. She threw the door open and jumped out, boots crunching on the icy ground. Hey, she shouted over the engine, her voice sharp with panic. Kid, hey. Eli tried to talk, but only a broken sound came out. He lifted one shaky hand toward her, then tipped sideways. Hannah ran. With every quick step she took toward him, the whole story of his life, the fights, the diagnosis, the cruel decision in the car that morning seemed to race toward a new path. But whether this new path would save him or break him, no one knew yet, not Hannah. Not Carter, who was speeding down the mountain trying to silence his guilty mind. Not Eli, whose chest hurt so much he couldn't tell if he was still breathing. As Hannah dropped to her knees in front of him, the wind howled, the truck engine rattled, and the mountain watched quietly, holding its secrets. Years later, when the truth about what happened on that road finally came out, when a grown young man stood face to face with the father who left him there, people would replay this exact moment in their minds. The moment a stranger's truck stopped. The moment a little boy's life split in two before and after the mountains. But right now, all Eli knew was that he was cold, scared, and staring into the worried eyes of a woman he had never seen before. And what she chose to do next would change everything. Hannah's knees hit the frozen ground so hard she barely felt them, because all she could see was the little boy's pale face, and the way his fingers dug into his own chest like he was trying to hold his heart together with his hands. Hey, stay with me," she said, her breath making fast clouds in the cold air as she leaned close. His lips had a faint blue shade, his eyelashes clumped with tiny bits of snow, and his small coat did almost nothing against the sharp mountain wind. "What's your name, kid?" she asked, her voice shaking only a little. His eyes fluttered, heavy and scared. Eli," he whispered, the word almost swallowed by the sound of the truck engine. "Okay, Eli," Hannah replied, forcing calm into her tone even as her stomach churned. "I'm Hannah. I need you to look at me. Can you do that?" His eyes tried to focus on her face, then rolled slightly as another wave of dizziness washed over him. "Hurts," he breathed. "My chest hurts. I can't breathe." That was all she needed to hear. She had grown up in these mountains, seen people get hurt by falls and frost and foolish choices, but she had never seen someone so small and fragile in a place like this. She glanced quickly up and down the empty road. No other cars, no adults running toward them, no angry father yelling, "What are you doing with my kid?" Just trees, snow, and silence. Someone had left this boy here, on purpose. That thought made her feel sick. Without wasting another second, she slipped her arms under his tiny body. He felt light, too light, like he was made of sticks and paper instead of bones and muscle. When she lifted him, his head dropped against her shoulder, and she heard the strange, uneven rhythm of his heart hammering under his ribs. "Hang on, kiddo," she muttered, carrying him to the truck as fast as she could without jostling him too much. She opened the passenger door and gently settled him on the worn seat, propping him up so he wasn't lying flat. His dinosaur toy slipped from his hand and landed on the floor mat with a soft thump. "No," he whispered weakly, reaching out, but his arm fell back halfway. Hannah scooped up the toy and placed it in his lap. "There," she said. "He's not going anywhere, neither are you if I can help it." She buckled the seatbelt around Eli, pulled her old brown jacket tighter around herself, then ran around the front of the truck, boots slipping slightly on the icy gravel. Her fingers shook as she grabbed the steering wheel again. She thought of the clinic down the mountain, of the nurse who always complained about long shifts, of the one doctor who tried to cover 3 towns at once. It wasn't much, but it was better than a freezing road, better than a slow, lonely death. As she slammed the truck into gear, Eli's head tipped toward the window. "My dad," he whispered, Hannah's heart clenched. "Did he leave you here?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. Eli's brows pinched together. "Car went away," he said. "He said someone will come." A bitter taste filled Hannah's mouth. She wanted to curse, to scream into the cold air, to chase that shiny car down and drag the driver back by the collar, but there was no time for anger. Not now. She pressed her foot down and the old truck lurched forward, rattling and roaring like it was as outraged as she was. The road twisted and dipped, and she drove faster than she should have, hands tight on the wheel, eyes flicking between the ground ahead and the boy beside her. At every corner she listened for his breathing, counting the seconds between each strained inhale. Sometimes there was a tiny gasp, sometimes a weak cough. Sometimes only a fragile silence that made her press harder on the gas. "Stay with me, Eli," she said, voice firm even though her palms were damp with sweat. "You are not allowed to give up, you hear me? Not in my truck. My truck only carries fighters." His eyelids fluttered again, and for a moment he focused on her profile. "You mad?" he whispered, because even in this moment some part of him was used to grown-ups being angry when he couldn't keep up. Hannah shook her head, jaw tight. "Not at you, kid, never at you. I'm mad at the world. I'm mad at whoever thought a mountain was a place to leave a kid who can't breathe right." He didn't understand all her words, but he understood the tone. It sounded like protection. It sounded like something he had almost forgotten, someone choosing him even when he was hard work. His fingers curled weakly around the dinosaur. "My mom will be scared," he murmured. "She doesn't know where I am." The drive felt both endless and too fast. Every bump made Hannah's back ache, but she didn't slow down. By the time the clinic came into view, a low building with peeling white paint and a flickering sign that read Pine Ridge Medical, her heart was pounding almost as fast as Eli's. She screeched to a stop in front of the entrance and jumped out, leaving the engine running. The door banged as she flung it open and lifted Eli again. His head lolled against her shoulder, his breath coming in fast, shallow pulls that made a small whistling sound. Inside the clinic, the air smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. A tired woman in faded blue scrubs sat behind the front desk, staring at a computer screen. She looked up slowly, expecting another twisted ankle or a cut hand from someone chopping wood. Her eyes widened when she saw Hannah burst through the door with a limp child in her arms. "We need help now," Hannah shouted, louder than she meant to. "He's not mine. I found him near the ridge. He can't breathe." The nurse's chair scraped back. She hit a button on the wall, calling for the doctor, and rushed around the desk. "What's his name?" she asked as they hurried down the hall toward a small exam room. "Eli," Hannah answered. "That's all I know. He said his dad's car drove off. He has some kind of heart problem, I think. His chest, it doesn't sound right." The nurse nodded sharply, face tightening with focus. "Room 3, she called. "Put him in room 3. The door flew open, and Hannah laid Eli carefully on the narrow bed. The bright light above them made his skin look even paler, the dark circles under his eyes deeper. A man in a white coat rushed in, glasses slightly crooked, stubble on his chin. This was Dr. Miller, the only full-time doctor for miles around. "What happened?" he asked, already pressing a stethoscope to Eli's chest. Hannah took a step back but stayed close enough that the boy could see her if he opened his eyes. "I found him alone on the mountain road," she said quickly. "No adults. He said his dad drove off. He was gasping, said his chest hurt. I think it's his heart. He looks like he's been struggling for a while." The doctor's face grew serious as he listened. His brow furrowed deeper with each beat. "This is not just altitude," he muttered. "He has a congenital issue. I'd bet my license on it. Heart sounds wrong, lungs are struggling. How long was he out there?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted, guilt twisting in her even though she had done nothing wrong. "Long enough to scare me half to death." The next minutes turned into a blur of wires, beeping machines, and quick, sharp orders. The nurse slipped an oxygen mask over Eli's face, adjusting the straps gently as he flinched. His tiny chest rose and fell faster then slower, trying to find a rhythm it could hold. Dr. Miller started an IV, his hands steady, voice calm, even as the numbers on the monitor made him frown. "Come on, little guy," he murmured. "You've been fighting this long, you don't quit on me now." Hannah stood near the wall, fists clenched, watching every movement. She wanted to help. She wanted to fix something, but all she could do was be there and refuse to look away. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Eli's breathing evened out a little. The blue tint in his lips faded to a pale pink. His eyes opened halfway, glassy and confused, and he stared at the ceiling like he didn't know where he was. "You're in a clinic," Dr. Miller told him gently. "You're safe right now. We're helping your heart and lungs work better." Eli's gaze slid to Hannah, who stepped closer so he could see her clearly. "You stayed," he whispered, surprised. "Yeah," she replied softly. "I don't leave people on mountains." His fingers twitched, reaching toward her, and she wrapped her calloused hand around his small one. When Dr. Miller stepped out to call for extra support and report the abandoned child, Hannah followed him into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, casting a tired glow. "What happens now?" she asked. "He said his dad left him there on purpose." The doctor rubbed his forehead. "I have to call the sheriff," he said. "This is serious. If what the kid said is true, we're looking at neglect at the very least. Maybe worse. We also need to find his mother if he has one." "He mentioned her?" "Yeah," Hannah nodded. "He said his mom would be scared. He didn't give a name." Dr. Miller sighed. "We'll get social services involved. They'll try to trace him, see if he's on any medical records. A heart like his should have a file somewhere." "But Hannah," he paused, eyes searching her face. "People who leave kids in places like that don't usually come back asking for them. He might be alone for a while." The idea made something hot rise in Hannah's chest. She had grown up knowing what it felt like to be second choice, to see her own father pick the bottle over his family, to watch her mother's health fail while everyone said, "That's just life in these parts." She had worked 2 jobs since she was a teenager, fixed engines for anyone who paid in cash, and taken care of her younger brother so he could dream about college instead of mines. She knew what it meant to be left behind. "If he's alone," she said slowly, "then he's not going to stay that way, not if I can help it." Dr. Miller looked at her for a long moment then nodded. "Let's see what the sheriff says," he replied, "but I'll put it in my notes. Sometimes the system moves faster when it sees someone ready to step in." Meanwhile, miles away in the city, Carter sat in his quiet office on the top floor of a glass tower and stared at his reflection in the window. The view below showed traffic crawling like shiny beetles, people rushing with briefcases and coffees, the world moving as if nothing had happened. His tie was perfectly straight, his hair was in place, his phone buzzed with messages about deals and meetings. Everything on the surface said he was fine. But inside, his mind replayed the image of Eli on the side of the road, small and shaking. He could still hear the weak voice calling, "Dad, please," echoing in his ears. He shut his eyes hard, trying to push it away. It had to be done, he told himself. He was suffering, he would have held everything back, people would have talked, you spared him. But every time he tried to put those cold words over the memory, they slid off like water on glass. His assistant knocked and stepped in with a folder. "Mr. Hayes, the board is waiting for the updated statement about your family foundation," she said. "They want to highlight your support for children's hospitals." The irony hit him like a slap. His chest tightened and for a second he thought he might not be able to breathe. "Leave it," he said roughly. "I'll sign it later." When she closed the door, he leaned forward, pressing his fists into his desk. A thought flickered through his mind, quick and sharp. You don't know for sure that he's gone. Maybe someone found him, maybe he cut the idea off before it could finish. If someone found Eli and he survived, then everything he had done was not just cruel, it was pointless. That was even worse. He needed to believe there was no turning back, no other path. So when a private investigator he had hired weeks earlier called later that day, giving him an easy way out, Carter took it. "We traced medical records for your son in several regions," the man's smooth voice said over the phone. "There's a way to mark files as closed if you wish. Sometimes families prefer privacy when a sick child passes." Carter stared out the window, knuckles white. "Do it," he said. The investigator hesitated. "Sir, to be clear, you want us to record that your son died from complications of his condition." The word "died" hit him like a rock, but he swallowed hard. "Yes," he whispered. "It's what everyone expects anyway. It's easier this way." In that moment, Carter killed his son on paper, even though Eli was still alive in a small clinic bed up in the mountains, taking shaky breaths under a humming machine. It was a lie built from fear and pride and cowardice, and it would come back to meet him one day, but right then he only felt a bitter sense of control returning. Back at Pine Ridge Medical, the sheriff arrived, a tall man named Grant with lines around his eyes and a heavy winter jacket. He listened to Hannah's story, asked careful questions, and then stepped into Eli's room to hear from the boy himself. Eli, still weak, answered in short, breathy phrases. "We drove, long time, trees, snow." He said someone will come, he explained, eyes staring at the blanket instead of at the adults. "Do you know your dad's full name?" the sheriff asked gently. Eli's brow wrinkled. "Dad calls himself important," he said softly, like repeating a word he'd heard grown-ups use. "He says he owns big buildings, people on TV talk about him. Does he have a last name?" the sheriff pushed, trying not to sound desperate. "Hayes," Eli whispered after a moment. "My name is Eli Hayes." Hannah felt a chill run through her. She had heard that name before, everyone had. It was on billboards and in news stories about huge projects and big donations. Carter Hayes, the man who never lost. The man whose company logos were stamped on half the new towers in the city. A man who, if this boy was telling the truth, had just walked away from his own sick child on a mountain. Sheriff Grant stepped outside with Dr. Miller and Hannah, his face more serious than before. "If this kid belongs to the Hayes family, this won't be simple," he said quietly. "We're not just dealing with some drunk parent from town, we're dealing with one of the richest men in the state." Hannah crossed her arms, anger simmering under her skin. "So what?" she snapped. "Money doesn't change what he did. It doesn't change the fact that this boy almost died alone." "I didn't say it excused him," Grant replied. "I said it makes it complicated. People like him have lawyers, they have stories ready, they're very good at making ugly things disappear." Dr. Miller adjusted his glasses. "So what do we do?" he asked. The sheriff looked back through the small window in the door at Eli, who lay staring at the dinosaur in his hand, chest rising slowly. "We do our job," Grant said. "I'll file the report. I'll reach out carefully, see what kind of response we get. But until there's a safe arrangement, this boy stays in protective care. No one takes him without my say." Hannah's jaw tightened. "Protective care means where?" she asked. "A foster home," Grant nodded. "Most likely, unless," he paused, looking at her. "Unless someone steps up, someone we trust, someone who understands his condition is not going away and still wants him." The idea landed in Hannah's mind like a heavy, bright stone. She thought of her small cabin near the edge of town, the creaky porch and the warm stove, the old couch that had held her through long nights of worry. She thought of her younger brother, Lucas, who still believed the world had room for dreams, who stayed up late reading about engines and design instead of getting drunk at the bar like half the other boys his age. She thought of the stack of past due bills on her table and the feel of grease under her nails that never fully washed out. She thought of another pair of small shoes by the door, another bowl on the table, another heart in the house that would need more than food and warmth. It would need patience, medicine, and steady love. It would be hard. It might break her. But when she pictured walking away, leaving Eli to be shuffled from one strange house to another, Her chest hurt worse than any long day under a hood. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. "If they'll let me, I'll take him." Dr. Miller's eyebrows rose. "Hannah, you're already carrying a lot," he said softly. "Your brother, your work." She shook her head. "He's a kid who almost died because someone decided he was too much trouble," she replied. "I know what that feels like. I can't fix his heart, but I can give him a place where he's not a problem to be solved. He's just a boy." Sheriff Grant studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll talk to social services," he said. "They'll run checks, ask questions, all that boring stuff. But if everything checks out and we don't see any safe family stepping up, you might get your wish." The next few days stretched like a strange, quiet storm. Eli stayed in the clinic, hooked to machines that beeped softly, his body slowly gathering strength now that it had warmth, oxygen, and care. He woke from short naps to see Hannah sitting in the chair by his bed, sometimes reading a worn magazine about cars, sometimes just watching him to make sure his chest kept moving. She told him small stories about the mountains, about a fox that stole her lunch once, about a snowstorm that trapped the whole town in for 3 days. Her voice was rough in places but gentle, like someone who hadn't had many chances to be soft and was still learning how. He didn't talk much at first. When he did, his words came in pieces. "Is my dad coming back?" he asked one afternoon as snow tapped against the window. The question cut through the room like a blade. Hannah took a slow breath. She wanted to tell him no, and he doesn't deserve you, but she couldn't break him like that, not yet. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some people are looking for answers, but I do know this: you're not going to be alone, okay? I'm here now, and I don't run from broken engines or kids with tricky hearts." His small mouth twitched like he was trying to decide whether to smile or cry. "I'm not broken," he whispered. "Just tired." That simple correction made her eyes burn. "You're right," she said. "You're not broken, Eli. You're just fighting harder than most." In the city, a different story took shape. A short, polished statement quietly appeared in certain places, a private note to a few hospital boards, a whispered update at a country club. It said that the Hayes family had suffered a private loss, that their young son, who had struggled with a heart condition since birth, had passed away due to complications. It asked for privacy and understanding. People who read it shook their heads with a mix of sadness and relief that it wasn't their story. "Tragic," some said, "but at least they tried everything," others murmured. Carter smiled sadly when anyone offered sympathy, playing the part of a grieving father. He never cried in public, he barely let himself cry in private. When the pain threatened to rise, he buried it under work, under deals, under numbers, until even he wasn't sure what was real anymore, the story he told the world or the one he tried to forget. Weeks passed, paperwork moved from desk to desk. Social workers visited the clinic, then Hannah's small cabin, inspecting corners and cupboards and asking about income and support. Lucas, tall and thin with quick eyes, stood straight beside his sister and answered every question clearly. "She's been taking care of me since I was 12, he said. "She doesn't quit on people." At night, when the officials were gone and the wind howled outside, he sat at the kitchen table with Hannah, looking at the forms. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This is going to change everything. College, your hours at the shop." She rubbed her tired eyes and nodded. "Everything already changed the moment I saw him on that road," she replied. "The only question now is what we do about it." The day they finally brought Eli to her house, the sun was shining weakly through thin clouds. He stood on the small path in front of the cabin, holding a small bag the social worker had given him, his dinosaur tucked under his arm. He looked unsure, like a person stepping into a story they hadn't been told the ending of. Hannah knelt in front of him. "Welcome home, kid," she said. The word made his eyes fill with tears. "Home," he echoed. "Even if I get tired a lot, even if I can't run." She swallowed hard and nodded. "Especially then," she answered. "We'll figure it out together. No one here is going to be angry when you need to rest. We'll just sit with you, that's all." Life in the little cabin was not easy, but it was steady. Hannah arranged her work schedule so she could take Eli to appointments with Dr. Miller. She learned how to check his breaths, how to notice when his lips started to pale, how to keep emergency medicine close. She taught him how to hold a wrench, how to listen to an engine and tell if it was lying or telling the truth. Lucas helped with homework when Eli was strong enough to go to the small mountain school, and when he wasn't, Lucas brought books home and explained them at the kitchen table. The three of them made a strange little family, one built not from blood but from choices. Still, the past did not disappear. Sometimes in the middle of the night, Eli woke up with his heart racing, not from his condition but from memories. He saw the side of the road, the red lights fading, the shape of his father's shoulders as he walked away. Maybe he got lost, Eli told himself in the dark. Maybe he meant to come back. It hurt less to believe that than to believe the other thing. As he grew older, the questions grew with him. Why hadn't his mother found him? Why did no one from his old life come? Hannah answered what she could and admitted what she couldn't. She never lied about the hard parts, but she never pushed him to accept a truth his heart wasn't ready for either. Years began to slide by like pages turning. Eli's body grew taller, but his heart still needed careful watching. He learned the limits of his own strength, when to stop, when to ask for help, when to sit instead of climb. He also learned that limits didn't mean he was useless. He could fix small machines better than many grown men. He could listen, really listen, when people talked and notice things others missed. He could stand in the shop with a customer and say, "Something's wrong with your truck and it's not just the noise," and be right almost every time. He was 11 when he first heard the name Hayes again and realized that his past had not vanished. It was out there, shining and powerful, moving on without him. It happened on a slow afternoon in the small mechanic shop at the edge of town, where an old television sat on a shelf above the counter, usually showing weather or sports. That day, Lucas clicked it on while he sorted invoices, and a business news channel appeared by chance. The volume was low, just a soft murmur behind the sound of tools and distant traffic. Eli was wiping his hands on a rag, breathing a little heavier after helping push a car into the bay, when a familiar logo flashed on the screen, a sleek silver H over a dark blue background. Something in his chest gave a strange flutter that had nothing to do with his condition. He looked up. The reporter was talking about expansion, about towers and investments, but none of that mattered to him. What mattered was the image that appeared next. A man in a dark suit stepping up to a podium, cameras flashing around him. His hair was a little more gray, his jaw a little sharper, but the shape of his face, the line of his mouth, the way he held himself, it hit Eli like ice water. For a second he couldn't breathe, not from sickness, but from shock. The name on the screen spelled it out clearly. Carter Hayes, CEO, Hayes Property Group. The words came out of the television in a smooth, practiced tone. After the tragic loss of his only son years ago, Mr. Hayes has turned his pain into purpose through charity work for sick children. The rag slipped from Eli's hand and fell to the floor. His heart pounded, and this time he wasn't sure if it was the old problem or something brand new. "Hannah," he called, his voice thin and strange. She looked up from under the hood of a truck, grease on her cheek. "What is it?" she asked. He lifted a shaking hand and pointed at the screen. "That's him," he whispered. "That's my dad." And as the smiling face of the man who had left him on a frozen mountain filled the shop, while the world called him generous and broken-hearted, a storm Eli didn't know he had been holding back for years finally started to rise. For a long moment after the words left his mouth, no one moved, as if the air in the little shop had turned to glass and trapped them all inside it, with Carter's smiling face flickering from the old television like a ghost from another life that refused to stay buried, and Eli stood there in his oil-stained jacket, his thin shoulders rising and falling too fast. His hand still lifted toward the screen as if he could reach through it and grab the man on the other side and drag him back to that narrow mountain road where everything had been decided without his consent. Lucas froze mid-step by the counter, a stack of invoices in his hands, his eyes jumping from the TV to Eli to Hannah, and Hannah's rag slipped from her fingers and dropped into the open engine she'd been working on. But she barely noticed as she wiped her grease-streaked hands on her jeans and stepped out into the middle of the shop, her heart slamming so loudly she was sure the whole place could hear it, because this was the moment she had known would come one day, the moment she had tried to prepare for but never really believed she was ready for, the moment when the boy she had carried from the edge of death would finally look back and see clearly the man who had dropped him there. The television reporter kept talking in that smooth, polished tone made for expensive microphones and bright studio lights, describing how, after losing his only son to a rare heart condition, Mr. Hayes has poured himself into supporting children in need, and showing clips of Carter shaking hands with hospital staff, kneeling beside small patients in brand new wings funded by his money, his face carefully arranged into an expression of sad kindness that made strangers trust him. But it made Eli feel sick, like the floor under him had suddenly tilted, because the story on the screen and the story in his chest did not match, and his brain could not make them sit together without breaking something important inside him. Turn it up, Eli whispered. But his voice came out so thin and tight that Lucas moved before he even heard the words clearly, fumbling for the remote and pressing the volume button until Carter's voice filled the shop low and steady and practiced, saying things like no parent should ever have to bury a child, and our family knows the pain of loss. And every sentence felt like a rock thrown straight at Eli's ribs, because he remembered the feeling of cold gravel under his knees. The sound of boots walking away, the flash of red tail lights vanishing, and he could not match that man, the man who never looked back with this man, who now spoke as if grief had carved him into something noble. Hannah stepped closer to Eli, noticing the way his fingers had gone rigid at his sides, the way his breathing had shifted from normal tired to that tight, dangerous kind that meant his heart was racing too fast for too long, and she touched his arm carefully as if he might shatter if she grabbed too hard. "Hey," she said softly, but he pulled away just enough to keep his eyes locked on the screen. "He said I was dead," Eli murmured, more to himself than to them, as the news segment showed a picture of a small white marble plaque with engraved words about a beloved son gone too soon and flowers laid neatly below it. "He told the whole world I died." Hannah felt her throat close because she had seen an article like that once years ago when she had first taken Eli in, a small piece shared online about a powerful man suffering a quiet tragedy, and she had closed the page quickly before the words could sink too deep. She had looked at the boy sleeping on her couch and thought, if he ever sees this, it will tear him apart. So she had done what she could to keep the city far away, to keep their little cabin like an island where only the truth she could handle entered. But the world was big and loud and careless, and now the truth had walked right in through the television signal they never thought twice about. Lucas set the papers down slowly, his jaw tightening with the kind of anger that came from watching his sister work herself to the bone for years while people like Carter floated through life with polished shoes and smooth lies, and he picked up the remote again, thumb hovering over the power button. "Want me to turn it off?" he asked quietly. Eli's eyes flicked from the screen to him and then back, and something stubborn and sharp rose in his chest, the same stubbornness that had kept him breathing on that road when his lungs wanted to quit. "No," he said, stronger this time. "I want to hear everything." So they stood there in the smell of oil and metal and old coffee, listening as the reporter praised Carter's foundation, showed shots of sleek towers with the Hayes logo on them, and talked about a new project, a huge children's research center in the city, one that would change the future for kids with heart problems. The words punched a strange hole in Eli's mind. His father, the man who left him because his heart was a problem, now made buildings to help kids with hearts like his. It was like watching someone decorate the grave of a living person and call it kindness. When the segment finally ended and the channel moved on to talk about stock prices, the silence in the shop felt heavy and wrong. Eli swallowed, his mouth dry. "You knew," he said at last, turning slowly toward Hannah, and the hurt in his eyes made her want to look away, but she didn't. "You knew who he was, you knew what he told people." Her chest ached as she nodded, no excuses ready, just the truth she owed him. "I saw a story once," she admitted. "Years ago, after you came to live with us, it said what you just heard, that he lost a son, that the boy died. I was going to tell you when you were older, when your heart was stronger, when—" She stopped because the list of whens could go on forever and still not be enough. "I thought I was protecting you," she finished quietly. "Maybe I was also protecting myself from seeing you hurt like this." For a moment, Eli's face twisted, like he might shout, like he might throw something, like he might tear every Hayes logo off every product in the room. But then all the fight seemed to drain out of him at once, leaving him looking smaller than he had in years, like the 4-year-old on the mountain was suddenly standing in front of them again, wearing a borrowed jacket that didn't fully fit. "He made the whole world think I'm dead," Eli whispered. Was I that much of a problem?" Hannah took a step forward, her voice shaking as she spoke. "No," she said firmly. "You were never the problem. He was, his fear, his pride, his lies. You were the one fighting to live on a road no kid should have to stand on." But even as she said it, she knew that words, no matter how true, could only do so much against years of quiet doubt sitting in a boy's bones. The days after that moment were strange and uneven, like the ground had cracks they couldn't see. Eli went through the motions of work and school and chores, but his eyes were somewhere else, always drifting back to the tall glass towers on the distant horizon, towers with his last name on them, towers owned by a man who had erased him. At night he lay awake listening to his own heartbeat, wondering how it could sound so steady now when it had been judged unworthy years before. He started asking questions, small at first, then bigger. Did anyone ever try to find me? He asked Hannah over dinner one night, pushing peas around his plate. When I disappeared from the city, did my mom look for me? The fork in Hannah's hand paused. We don't know everything that happened there, she said carefully. We just know what the documents say, and we know what you told us. You said your mom didn't know where you were going that day. Eli nodded slowly. What if she thinks I'm dead too? He asked. The idea made his chest hurt in a new way. What if she cried over some empty box and put flowers on a fake grave? The thought lodged in his mind and would not leave. It followed him to the shop, to the clinic, to the small school classroom where maps of the state hung on the wall and the teacher talked about cities and roads and rivers that now felt personal. While the other kids whispered about sports and weekend plans, Eli stared at the thin gray line that marked the highway leading to the city where Hayes Property Group's main tower rose, and he imagined walking every mile of it just to stand in front of that building and shout his own name until someone listened. His heart couldn't handle walking that far, of course, but his mind didn't care about limits when it started to dream. 2 weeks after seeing the news segment, he made a quiet decision. He didn't announce it. He didn't shout. He didn't slam any doors. He simply sat on the edge of his bed one evening holding his dinosaur, which he now kept on a shelf but picked up on hard days, and said softly, I need to know the truth, all of it, even if it breaks me. He was 16 now, tall enough that he almost reached Hannah's height, but his hands still trembled sometimes when his heart misfired, and he knew that no matter how strong he felt on good days, his body carried real limits. So if he was going to dig up the past, he had to be smart. He couldn't just storm a glass tower and demand answers. The world did not bend for boys with fragile hearts, no matter how angry they were. It barely bent for grown men with full health. He needed a path. A way in, a plan. The unexpected path came one afternoon at the clinic during a routine checkup. Dr. Miller was checking his chart, nodding approvingly at the slow improvement in his stamina since they had adjusted his medications and added new breathing exercises, when he glanced down at a leaflet on his desk, one Eli hadn't noticed before. It had the Hayes H on it, shiny and blue, and words across the top in bold letters. Young Minds Bright FUTURES Internship Program. Underneath, there were pictures of teenagers in lab coats in offices, in meeting rooms with glass walls and city views. What's that? Eli asked, his voice as calm as he could make it. Dr. Miller picked up the paper. Some new program the Hayes Foundation is launching, he said. They're offering internships for high school students from rural areas, kids who show promise in fields like engineering, medicine, business. They sent these to clinics and schools to spread the word. He smiled faintly. Supposed to be their way of giving back. Funny, right? The word funny tasted like rust in Eli's mouth. Can I see? He asked. The doctor handed him the leaflet and Eli read each line carefully. It described a chance to work in the city for a summer, to learn from the best minds, to join a group of young people from different towns. It talked about housing and supervision and health support for those with special medical needs. That line made something flare in his chest, a painful hope. The program was meant for kids exactly like him, kids who weren't from the city, kids with extra challenges. Kids the company, his father's company, could point to and say, see, we care. You thinking what I think you're thinking? Dr. Miller asked quietly, studying him over the top of his glasses. Eli lifted his eyes from the leaflet. If I get in, he said slowly, I'd have to go to the main tower, right? The one in the city? The doctor nodded. Most likely, yes. That's where their headquarters is. The room felt smaller, warmer. Eli could hear his own heartbeat again, faster now but not yet dangerous. Do you think I could handle it, traveling long days, all that? He asked. For once, this wasn't just about his heart, it was about whether the adults who had helped him live would trust him to walk into the lion's den on purpose. Dr. Miller leaned back, fingers steepled. Physically, with careful planning, yes, he said honestly. We need to coordinate with their medical team, make sure they understand your condition and your limits. You'd need rest breaks, meds on schedule, and a safe place to stay. But you've come far, Eli. You're stronger than you were. Emotionally, he paused. That's another question. Going there means stepping right into your past, even if you don't tell them who you are. Eli gripped the leaflet tighter. They already wrote my story without me, he replied. Maybe it's time I write some of it myself. That night he brought the leaflet home. Hannah read it at the kitchen table while a pot of soup simmered on the stove, and Lucas flipped through a car magazine nearby, pretending not to listen even though his shoulders were tense. When she finished, she set the paper down slowly, her face unreadable. You want to apply? She said. It wasn't a question. Eli nodded. I know it's crazy, he admitted. I know it's risky, but if I get in, I can go there without sneaking or lying. I can walk through the front door as someone they invited. I can see him. I can look at his face and know he's real and not just something my brain made bigger. Hannah's chest hurt again, but for a different reason now. And then what? She asked softly. You walk up to him and say, "Hi, remember me? I'm the son you left on a mountain. Surprise, I didn't die." The picture was so wild that Lucas let out a short, bitter laugh, then covered his mouth. Eli swallowed. "I don't know yet," he said. "Maybe I don't say anything at first. Maybe I just watch, learn, see what kind of man he is now, see if he ever looks like he regrets it. And if I don't go, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering. I already feel like half of me is stuck on that road. I need to move him either back into my life or out of my head for good." It was hard to argue with that kind of need. Hannah rubbed her forehead. "You understand he has power, right?" she said. "He has people, lawyers, guards. If he realizes who you are and doesn't want the world to know what he did, he could try to shut you up. He could twist things, make it seem like you're lying." Eli met her eyes steadily. "He already told the world I don't exist," he replied. "How much more erased can I get?" The simplicity of the question hit her like a blow. They talked for hours, going over every angle. Lucas argued both sides, packing the small kitchen, then finally stopped and leaned on the counter. "If you're going," he said, "you're not going alone. I may not get into that fancy program, but I can at least come to the city, get some job nearby, keep an eye on you. People like him don't scare me." In the end, they made a plan. Eli would apply under his legal name, Eli Cole, the name he had carried in school records since Hannah took him in, but leave out the Hayes part. He would highlight his interest in machines, his work at the shop, his understanding of how things break and get fixed. He wouldn't mention his past, not yet. His medical condition they couldn't hide. They would frame it as something he had learned to manage, proof of his resilience. The application process was competitive, with letters and essays and recommendations. Hannah wrote one, her rough handwriting smoothed by her effort to sound proper, talking about how Eli never used his illness as an excuse to give up. Dr. Miller wrote another, describing a patient who had turned survival into a kind of stubborn art. Lucas helped Eli write his own essay, one that didn't say "my father abandoned me," but did say, "I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere and still keep trying to build a place in the world." When they finally sent it off, there was nothing to do but wait. Waiting was its own kind of test. Every day, Eli checked his email at the tiny computer in the corner of the shop between customers. Every night, he lay in bed listening to the wind and his heart and wondering if somewhere in that tall tower, his father had any idea that a boy with his eyes was trying to step through his doors. The answer came on a rainy afternoon when the clouds hung low over the mountains and the shop was quiet. Hannah was under a truck, boots sticking out, while Eli sat at the counter, slowly entering numbers from receipts into an old spreadsheet, his breath steady, his mind half on the columns and half on the tower again. The computer dinged softly. He almost didn't hear it. When he glanced at the screen and saw the subject line, "Internship Program Decision," his hands went cold. For a second he just stared, heart thudding faster, and Hannah's muffled voice came from under the truck. "You okay up there?" He swallowed, clicked the email open, and began to read. His eyes moved quickly over the words. "We are pleased to inform you, selected, summer term city housing provided, stipend, orientation at Hayes Tower," the rest blurred. He stood up so fast his chair scraped back on the floor. "Hannah," he called, and his voice cracked in a way it hadn't since he was little. She rolled out from under the truck, grease on her cheek, and sat up, wiping her hands. "What happened?" she asked. He turned the monitor toward her with shaking fingers. "I got in," he said. "They want me, the program, the tower, all of it." For a moment all three of them just stared at the screen, as if the words might change if they blinked. Then Lucas let out a loud shout and grabbed Eli in a careful hug, mindful of his chest. Hannah's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. Pride and fear tangled inside her in a knot she couldn't pull apart. As they read the email in full, the details came into focus. He would be in the city for 8 weeks. He would be assigned to a division based on his interest, in his case, probably something related to engineering or building systems. He would have access to the research center and the main tower, including some events with senior executives. There would be medical staff on site and a full file sent ahead of time, so they could support interns with conditions like his. At the bottom, in neat digital letters, was a signature: Program Director, Hayes Foundation. No mention of Carter himself, but the shadow of his presence lay over every line. That night, as the mountains sat dark against the sky and the cabin lights glowed like a small ship in a black ocean, Eli stood at the window with his dinosaur on the sill and his acceptance letter printed out in his hand. Hannah came to stand beside him, her arms folded, her gaze on the distant, unseen city. "We can still say no," she said quietly. "Even after all this, you don't owe him anything. You don't have to walk into his world to prove you survived it." Eli shook his head slowly, eyes still on the darkness beyond the glass. "This isn't for him," he replied. "This is for me, for my mom wherever she is, for the kid on the road who thought no one was coming. I want him to know we didn't just survive, we came back." She studied his profile, seeing both the little boy and the young man he had become, and finally nodded. "Then we'll do it smart," she said. "We'll talk to the sheriff, to Dr. Miller, to anyone who needs to know. We'll make sure you're safe as much as we can. But once you go in there, Eli, things might never be the same again." He turned from the window and looked at her, his eyes steady in a way that made her heart ache with both pride and worry. "They're already not the same," he said. "The minute I saw his face on that screen, something changed. I can't go back to not knowing, I can only go forward." He set the acceptance letter on the table, next to a stack of bills and a few scattered tools, and in that small pile lay the whole strange shape of his life: struggle, work, love, fear, and now a path that led straight to the man who had tried to erase him. And as the wind pressed softly against the windows, far away in the city, a calendar notification popped up on a sleek computer in a glass office, adding one tiny new event to a busy schedule: "Welcome Session, Rural Intern Group." The name on that list would mean nothing yet to Carter Hayes, just one more young person eager to learn from his empire. He had no idea one of them shared his blood and carried the memory of a mountain in his bones. Not yet. When the day came that they would stand in the same room again, the truth would be too big to hide behind charity speeches and polished smiles. But for now, a countdown had quietly begun in two very different worlds, and they were moving toward each other whether they were ready or not. The weeks between the acceptance email and the day Eli actually left the mountains for the city did not slide by smoothly. They moved in strange jerks and pauses, like a truck on a rough road. Some days racing so fast he barely had time to breathe, and other days stretching so long that every minute felt like a test of whether he really wanted to step into the world of the man who had once decided he should not exist. There were forms to fill in and doctors to see and meetings with a social worker who had known him since his first shaky days at Pine Ridge Medical, making sure everyone understood that this was not just a normal teenager going off to see tall buildings. This was a young man whose heart had once nearly stopped on a frozen road, who now wanted to walk into the heart of the empire built by the father who left him there. Dr. Miller sat across from him in the small clinic office one afternoon, with a stack of papers and a look that was half pride, half worry, explaining the adjustments they had made to his medications for the trip, circling emergency contact numbers, and going over what Eli should do if he ever felt that familiar tightness in his chest while he was surrounded by glass walls instead of pine trees. "You have the right to ask for a break any time," the doctor said, his voice firm. "I don't care who you're talking to or what important meeting is happening. Your heart isn't impressed by money or power, it only understands oxygen and rest." Eli nodded, the words sitting heavy but welcome. He had learned long ago that pretending he wasn't tired never ended well, but now there would be more people watching, more eyes judging, and the old reflex to hide his weakness tried to creep back in. At home, Hannah pretended to be busy with practical things so she wouldn't fall apart in front of him. She checked his small suitcase 3 times, folding and refolding shirts until the fabric edges softened. She put together a box of tools, not the big wrenches and heavy gear he used in the shop, but a few small screwdrivers and a pocket tool, because she couldn't imagine sending him into the world without something that reminded him he knew how to fix things, even when they seemed broken beyond repair. She added a small notebook and pen, telling herself it was for notes during the internship, but secretly hoping he would use it to write down anything strange or worrying he noticed about the people and places around him. Lucas hovered too, pretending to complain as he double-checked travel plans on a shared computer at the library in town, making sure he understood the bus and train routes that would take him to the city a few days after Eli left so he could find work nearby. "Somebody has to be close by to punch your dad in the nose if he tries something stupid," he said with a crooked grin one evening over dinner, making Eli snort even as his chest fluttered with nerves. Hannah rolled her eyes at the idea of Lucas punching a billionaire with a dozen guards, but she didn't argue with the heart behind the joke. The morning of the trip came with a pale sky and a chill that felt sharper than usual, as if the mountain itself knew it was sending one of its own away. Hannah drove him to the small bus station in town, her old truck rattling and protesting as if it didn't like the idea either. Eli sat in the passenger seat with his bag at his feet and his dinosaur tucked carefully inside, the worn fabric peeking out just enough to make him feel like the boy on the mountain and the young man in the shop were still one person, not two separate lives. When they parked, people were already milling around the station, some hugging family members, some staring at their phones, some looking as nervous as he felt. The bus that would take him to the train station down in the valley was idling nearby, its engine humming quietly, a new sound compared to the old trucks he had grown up around. At the curb, Hannah faced him, her hands gripping his shoulders so tightly he could feel the warmth of her palms through his jacket. "You know you can come home any time," she said, eyes shining. "I don't care if it's one week in or one day. If at any point you feel like this is too much, you call me and I will drive down there and bring you back myself. No questions, no shame." He swallowed the lump in his throat and tried to give her the steady smile she had given him 100 times when he was scared before a procedure or a new medication. "I know," he said, "but I need to do this even if it's hard. I'm not going down there to prove I'm strong. I'm going because I'm tired of running from a story someone else wrote about me." Lucas stepped forward, pulled Eli into a careful hug and muttered into his ear, "Don't forget to text me the name of every person who looks like they get paid too much. I'll start a list." Eli laughed, a short, breathy sound that loosened his chest just enough. When he climbed onto the bus and found a seat by the window, he pressed his fingertips against the glass and watched as Hannah and Lucas grew smaller. Hannah lifted her hand in a wave, and for a brief second, Eli saw not just the woman who had fixed trucks and scraped together money for medical bills, but the stranger on a mountain road who once slammed on old brakes because a little boy's body was too small for the cold and too big for her to ignore. The bus pulled away. The town slipped behind them. Trees blurred into green and brown streaks, and the mountains, his mountains, began to fall back. His heart thudded in his chest, not with the wild, panicked racing of illness, but with the strange, uneven rhythm of someone leaving everything familiar to chase something that might hurt but also might heal. The farther they went, the more the world changed. The narrow roads turned wider. The houses grew taller and closer together. Traffic thickened. By the time he boarded the train that would take him directly into the city, the noise alone made his head spin. Voices layered over each other in ways he wasn't used to, dozens of lives pressing close, all with their own worries and hopes. He watched people rush past on the platform. A woman in a sharp blazer talking loudly into a phone, a group of kids his age laughing and shoving each other, a man in a faded jacket staring at the ground like it was the only steady thing he knew. Eli's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. His heartbeat quickened with the usual flare of anxiety that came in crowded spaces, but he remembered what Dr. Miller had told him: slow breaths, count in his head, trust his body to find its rhythm again, and he did just that until the pressure in his chest eased. When the train finally emerged from a long tunnel and the city skyline exploded into view, his breath caught in his throat for a whole different reason. He had seen pictures of it, of course, on television and in magazines that people left behind in waiting rooms, but seeing it in person was like stepping into another planet. Glass towers rose up in clusters, catching the light in long, sharp lines. Bridges crisscrossed above roads. Screens flashed ads and news and bright colors. One building in particular seemed to pull his eyes like a magnet. The tallest one, made of dark glass with silver lines that ran up its sides like veins, and at the very top, huge and clear, the Hayes logo gleamed. His last name, someone else's name, both, neither. It sat there in the sky like a claim: "I own this. This is mine." He wondered almost bitterly if somewhere inside that tower there was a file with his stolen death written on it. At the central station, a group of interns had been told to gather near a sign with the Hayes Foundation logo. Eli followed the instructions in his welcome packet, moving through the crowd slowly so he wouldn't get jostled too hard. When he reached the meeting point, a small cluster of teenagers was already there, each with a name tag and a nervous or excited expression. A woman in her 30s with a neat bun and a bright blue scarf stood in front of them, holding a clipboard and projecting the kind of cheerful energy that sounded like she drank too much coffee. "Welcome, everyone," she called as Eli approached. "You must be our rural scholarship group. I'm Nora. I'll be your orientation guide today. Make sure you have your tags visible. We want security to know you're supposed to be here and not just very enthusiastic fans." A few people laughed. Eli managed a thin smile. He took a name tag from the table when she told him to, his fingers hesitating for just a second as he pinned it onto his jacket. Eli Cole, it read in clean print. No haze, no hint of the blood he shared with the man upstairs. He watched as Nora went around, learning names and hometowns, clapping her hands once when someone mentioned being from a town she had visited, making small jokes to loosen the knots in their stomachs. There was a quiet girl from a coastal village who liked coding, a tall boy from a small farm who wanted to study architecture, a pair of cousins from a mining town who had taught themselves basic engineering from old manuals. Eli listened to their stories, feeling both close to them and completely distant. They were here chasing opportunity. He was here chasing a ghost. They were loaded into a sleek shuttle bus with tinted windows and comfortable seats, nothing like the old bus that had carried him down from the mountains. As the shuttle pulled into traffic and headed toward the cluster of towers in the distance, Nora pointed out landmarks through a small microphone. On your left is the city hospital our foundation helped rebuild, she said. And up ahead, that tall building with the blue lines is Hayes Tower. That's where most of you will spend the majority of your time. The closer they got, the bigger it seemed, the glass reflecting the sky like it was trying to swallow the clouds. Eli's chest tightened, but not from lack of air. His body seemed to understand where he was going even before his mind fully accepted it. When the shuttle finally pulled up in front of the tower and the doors hissed open, the interns stepped out one by one onto polished stone. The wind at this height smelled different from mountain air, less like pine and dirt, more like car exhaust and hot metal, mixed with something sharp and clean from the building's air systems. Eli tilted his head back to look up, the top disappearing into light. For a second he felt very small. Then he remembered how small he had felt on that mountain road, how the sky had seemed too big and too empty, and a strange flicker of stubbornness lit up inside him. He had survived that. He could survive this too. Inside, the tower lobby was like a different world again. Light streamed in through huge windows. There were plants in tall white pots, a wide staircase that seemed to float, and a reception desk that curved like a wave. People moved quickly through the space, their ID badges flashing, their shoes tapping on the shiny floor. Security gates with small green lights stood between the lobby and the elevators. Nora led them to a side area with chairs and a screen. We're going to start with badges and building rules, she said. You'll also meet some of the program staff and hear from one very important guest if his schedule holds. So sit tight and try not to look too terrified. You all earned your spot here. Eli sat near the end of the row, close to the aisle, because he had learned long ago that he needed clear paths in case his heart decided to misbehave. A man from security came by one to scan their temporary badges and confirm their information. When he reached Eli, he paused for just a second, eyes flicking to the note on his tablet about the intern with the heart condition. We've got your medical file, the man said quietly, his tone more gentle than Eli expected from someone with a buzz cut and a stiff uniform. There's a wellness room on every other floor. If you feel off at any point, you tell your supervisor no matter what's happening. We'd rather call an ambulance for nothing than miss something important. Understood? Yes, sir, Eli said. It was strange thinking these strangers might care more about his chest tightening than the man whose genes had built half of it. After the badge checks, the screen at the front of the room lit up with the Hayes logo, and a woman in a smart gray suit walked in, smiling in that practiced way of someone used to talking to groups. She introduced herself as Jenna, the program director, and began a speech about opportunities and growth and how impressive it was that they had come from small towns to stand in this glass tower. Eli listened with half an ear, his attention caught by something else, the small door at the side of the room, the one that security staff slipped in and out of from time to time. Every time it opened, his heart ticked up just a little, wondering if he would see that familiar face. He didn't, not yet. Then Jenna's tone changed slightly, becoming more excited. We are especially honored today, she said, because our CEO has managed to clear a few minutes from his schedule to welcome you personally. He believes strongly in this program. In fact, he often says that you remind him of the son he lost, young, brave, and full of potential. The words hit Eli like a punch. The room stirred with whispers. Somewhere down the row, someone murmured, "Wow, he must be really nice if he comes himself." Eli sat very still, his fingers tightening around the edge of his chair. His heart rate monitor watch beeped a quiet warning against his wrist, but he ignored it. His vision narrowed to the small door at the side of the room. When it opened this time, the air seemed to change. It wasn't magic, it was just the way people reacted. The security guard straightened. Jenna's smile brightened into something almost nervous, and then he walked in. Carter Hayes looked a little older than in the last video Eli had seen, a few more lines by his eyes, a bit more gray near his temples, but he moved with the same contained confidence, the kind of calm that said he expected rooms to bend around him. He wore a dark suit that fit perfectly, his tie barely a shade lighter, his shoes gleaming. As he stepped to the front, he gave the room a warm, practiced smile that made several interns straighten and smooth their clothes without realizing it. To everyone else, he was a powerful man being generous with his time. To Eli, he was the figure walking away through snowfall, turning his back on a small boy who couldn't catch his breath. For a few seconds, Eli could not hear anything. His ears filled with the rush of his own blood. The ceiling lights blurred. He gripped the chair so hard his knuckles turned white. His heart monitor buzzed again, this time a little louder. He forced himself to breathe, to blink, to let sound back in. "Proud to welcome you," Carter was saying. "When I was young, no one in my town believed a kid like me could one day stand where I stand now. I want you to know that where you come from doesn't limit where you can go." The words might have inspired Eli once. Now they made his stomach twist, because he knew that in Carter's world, some kids were allowed to climb and others were meant to be left behind for the sake of convenience. At one point, Carter paused and scanned the room slowly, his gaze moving across the faces in the front row, then the middle, then the back. For a terrifying electric moment, his eyes met Eli. It was like feeling cold water thrown over his head and hot coals pressed into his chest at the same time. Did Carter see anything familiar in his face, the curve of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, or was he just another nameless teenager in a room full of potential? Eli held his gaze, searching for something, shock, guilt, recognition, anything, but Carter's expression did not change. His eyes moved on as if there was nothing there to notice. Jenna invited them to ask questions, and a few interns raised their hands, asking about careers and goals and what it took to build such a big company. Eli sat frozen, his mind spinning. Part of him wanted to stand up and shout the truth, to watch that calm face crack in front of an audience. Another part of him, the part that had learned to take measured breaths and count his heartbeats, knew that this was not the moment. He hadn't come all this way to explode in a room full of strangers and cameras. He wanted more than a scene, he wanted answers. He wanted the truth pulled out into the light so it couldn't crawl back into shadows. Then something unexpected happened. One of the interns, a boy from the back, asked a simple question. "What made you start helping kids' hospitals?" Carter's smile faltered for just a second, then softened into something that looked almost real. He paused, looking down at his hands, then up again. "I lost my son," he said quietly, the room leaning in. "He was born with a weak heart. We tried everything, the best doctors, the best care, it wasn't enough. For a long time, I thought money could fix anything. That experience taught me how wrong I was." His voice did not shake, but his eyes seemed to. "The day he died changed me. I promised myself no child would suffer like that if I could help it. That's why this foundation exists." The interns around Eli looked moved. Someone sniffed, someone else whispered, "That's so sad." Eli felt like he might throw up. The story was so clean, so polished, so far from the truth that he wanted to stand up and shout, "You are lying. I did not die in a hospital bed. I almost died on the side of a road that you chose, in air that made my lungs burn." But then, in the middle of his anger, a strange thought flickered. What if, after leaving him, Carter really believed he had died? He had paid someone to close the file, to make the records match what he needed to be true. Had he never once wondered if maybe, somehow, the world had not followed his script? Did he really think the boy on the mountain had simply vanished, as if the universe had agreed with his choice? The possibility did not erase the cruelty of that decision, but it twisted the knife in a different way. This man was grieving a story he had helped create, crying over a death he had chosen without being able to look at it directly. After the speech, there was a brief moment where a few interns were allowed to line up for a quick handshake. Jenna encouraged them, saying it was a rare chance. Eli's chest squeezed. Every step closer to that line would be a step closer to the man whose fingerprints were on his deepest wound. He stayed seated, and Nora, the guide, slipped over to him with a small frown, noticing the color draining from his face. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Do you need some water, a break?" His watch buzzed again under his sleeve, scolding his stubbornness. "I'm fine," he lied automatically, then caught himself. This was exactly the kind of moment Dr. Miller had warned him about. "Actually, maybe some air," he added. Nora nodded immediately. "Come on," she said. "I'll take you to the wellness room, that's what it's for." As she led him out a side door, the line of interns inched toward Carter, some grinning nervously, some rehearsing what they would say. Carter shook hands, offered small pieces of advice, and moved through the line like a practiced actor. He did not notice the boy who had stayed behind, the one who had his eyes and his heart condition and the memory of his back turned against a snowy sky. Not yet. The wellness room on that floor was quiet and softly lit, with a couch, a recliner, a small fridge with water and juice, and a window that looked out over a slice of the city. Nora sat Eli down in the recliner and handed him a bottle of water. "I saw your medical note," she said gently. "You don't have to be here, okay? This place is intense even for totally healthy people." He took a sip, focusing on slow breaths until the buzzing in his wrists stopped. "Thanks," he murmured. She gave his shoulder a light pat and stepped aside to give him space, checking messages on her tablet. For a few minutes, he just sat there, listening to his heartbeat, trying to decide if he had just lost a chance or dodged a disaster by not getting in that handshake line. Then there was a soft knock on the doorframe and someone else stepped in, someone who was not Nora. "Is it okay if I come in?" a young woman's voice asked. Eli looked up. She was in her early 20s, maybe a few years older than him, wearing a Haze Foundation badge and carrying a tablet tucked under one arm. Her hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she had the kind of face that looked like it smiled easily but had learned to hold back. Nora glanced up and nodded. "He just needed a break," she said. "Orientation was a lot." The young woman smiled, her eyes landing on Eli with a curious softness. "I get that," she said. "First time I walked into this building, I nearly turned around and walked back out. I'm Lily, by the way. I help manage intern schedules." The name made something tug in Eli's memory, one of the stories Hannah had watched months back about a flower girl and doctors, but he pushed the distraction aside. "I'm Eli," he said. "From Pine Ridge." Lily's eyebrows lifted slightly. "The mountain town?" she asked. "I've read some of the intake notes. We like to know where everyone's coming from." "You must be the one with the long medical file." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, that's probably me." She took a step closer, studying him in a way that felt different from the way doctors studied him, not scanning for symptoms but trying to see something under the surface. "You looked like you were going to pass out when Mr. Hayes was speaking," she said gently, not accusing. "Was it the story or the crowd?" He hesitated. This was a stranger, a staff member, someone who technically worked for the man he was here to confront. But something in her calm eyes made him feel less like he was under a microscope and more like he was sitting across from someone who remembered what it felt like to have the ground pulled out from under your feet. "Both," he admitted. "He said something that didn't match what I know." Lily nodded slowly, as if she understood more than he was saying. "Stories around here rarely match perfectly," she murmured. "Sometimes the truth gets ironed flat so it looks good under lights." The way she said it made him look at her more closely. "Why do you work here if you feel that way?" he asked. A tiny smile touched her mouth. "Because if people who care about messy truth leave, then only the ones who like polished lies stay," she replied. "And I've seen enough kids in hospital beds to know someone has to keep pushing from the inside, even if it's just a little bit." Her answer sank into him like a stone in a pond, sending ripples out. Maybe he thought he wasn't the only one here who carried heavy stories under the neat badge and clean clothes. For a moment, the weight on his chest felt slightly less lonely. They talked a little more about schedules and safety, about how to navigate the tower without getting lost, and then Lily glanced at the time. "I need to get back," she said. "But if you ever feel overwhelmed, this room is open, and so am I. My office is on floor 18. Just don't try to climb the stairs to get there. Use the elevator," she added with a lightness that made him huff a small laugh. When she left, Eli sat back, staring at the slice of city outside. The day was far from over. This was only the first crack in the wall between his world and his father's. Over the next week, life in the tower settled into a strange rhythm. Each morning, he rode the elevator up with other interns, the smooth hum of the machine a far cry from the old clank of the shop's garage door. He was assigned to a department that managed building systems, ventilation, backup generators, the quiet machines that kept everything running so smoothly most people never thought about them. It suited him. He understood systems that worked quietly in the background, drawing little attention unless they broke. His supervisor, a calm, observant man named Jard, quickly noticed that Eli had an ear for trouble. "You hear things most of us don't," Jard said one afternoon after Eli pointed out a faint, irregular hum in a cooling unit that no one else had caught. "That's useful here." Yet even as he learned the patterns of the tower, his mind kept circling back to the man at the top. He saw Carter only from a distance after that first orientation day, stepping into a private elevator, walking across a lobby surrounded by assistants, appearing on screens for internal broadcasts. Each time, Eli's heart did a strange double beat, but he forced himself to act normal. He didn't want to be the boy who collapsed in a hallway because his past walked by. He wanted to be the one who gathered enough pieces of the truth to confront it in full. He started paying attention to meeting schedules pinned quietly on internal boards to which floors Carter visited and when. He noticed patterns: weekly check-ins at the Foundation wing, unannounced drop-ins at the research center, rare but intense visits to the operations floor when something big went wrong. One late evening after most interns had left, Eli found himself alone in a small control room checking logs while Jard took a call. Through the glass wall, he could see part of the research center below where white coats moved between rooms, monitors glowed softly, and a framed dedication plaque hung on the far wall. He squinted at it, the words blurry from distance. "For the ones we lost," it said, and below that in smaller letters a name. "In memory of Eli Hayes," his own name. His stolen grave, something in him went very still. It was like seeing his own ghost printed in metal. He pressed a hand against the glass as if he could reach through and scrape the letters off. Behind him, the door opened softly and Jard stepped back in. "You okay?" he asked casually, following Eli's gaze. "Most people think that plaque is touching. You look like you want to throw it out the window." Eli forced himself to drop his hand. "I've never liked grave markers," he said, choosing his words carefully. "They always feel like someone tying a bow on pain and calling it done." Jard gave him a curious look but didn't push. "Fair enough," he said. "Come on, finish up here. You don't want to miss dinner. City food is the only thing that makes these long days worth it." As they left the control room, Eli glanced back once more at the plaque. Anger, grief, and something else. A fierce, low-burning resolve mixed inside him. That metal square thought it owned his name. So did the man whose signature was probably stamped at the bottom of the dedication paperwork. But Eli knew now that names and stories could be taken back, even if it took time. He didn't know that the first real crack in the polished surface of Carter's life would appear not because of anything he did, but because of one unexpected file on a screen upstairs. A week after the interns arrived, Carter sat alone in his office late at night, the city lights casting his reflection faintly on the glass. He was reviewing a report from the Foundation about the new intern program, skimming names and backgrounds in a detached way, when his eyes snagged on a simple line. "Intern, Building Systems Division, Eli Cole, age 16, from Pine Ridge." The name Eli always made him pause. It was a habit he had never broken, even after telling the world his son was gone. He usually skipped anything that brought that ache up. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, he clicked on the intern's file. The details filled the screen: medical history, congenital heart condition, multiple hospital visits as a child, a note from Dr. Miller at Pine Ridge Medical summarizing his resilience and careful management. The words blurred for a second. His hand tightened on the mouse. A sick chill slid down his spine. He looked again at the picture attached to the file, a recent photo for the intern badge. A young man, not a little boy, dark hair, brown eyes, a serious mouth. Something sharp and familiar in the set of his jaw. Carter's breath caught. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. It couldn't be. He had buried that story years ago, paid for records to match the lie, but the more he stared, the more the ground under his lie shifted. His heart pounded in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with fear. "No," he whispered to the empty room. "It's a coincidence, just a coincidence." But his fingers were already trembling over the keyboard, calling up old, locked files, trying to match dates and locations and diagnoses. As the lines of data scrolled past, the truth he had built walls around for years began to leak through. Somewhere in this tower, walking his halls, breathing his curated air, was a boy who shared his son's name, his son's condition, and more than a little of his son's face. The story he had sold the world, that his child had died in a hospital, that he had done everything he could, suddenly felt thinner than the glass between him and the night. And as that realization slowly sank its claws into him, down on a lower floor an elevator dinged softly and opened, and Eli stepped out, unaware that the man he had come to confront had just discovered that the ghost he mourned had a heartbeat after all. When Carter clicked through file after file that night and saw the words "congenital heart defect" beside the name Eli Cole, and then stared at the photo of a boy whose eyes looked too much like the ones that had followed him in his nightmares for years, something inside him cracked in a way it never had at any board meeting, charity gala, or fake grief speech, because board reports and glossy magazines were things he could control, but this boy's face. This boy's medical history that matched dates and hospitals and diagnoses he knew too well, felt like a hand reaching out of the past and grabbing him by the throat. And for the first time since that day on the mountain, he heard his own voice in his head without excuses, a voice that whispered, "What if he did not die the way you pretended he did? What if the world refused to finish the terrible story you tried to write?" His hand shook so badly that he had to put the mouse down and press his fingers flat on the desk to stop the tremor. And the city lights outside his glass wall blurred as his eyes filled with tears he had never let himself shed in private. Because he was the man who never lost. The man who solved problems by throwing money and power at them until they went quiet. And yet here was a problem he had tried to erase by leaving it on the side of a road, breathing in the cold. And now it was walking his hallways with his badge and his heart condition, and his name hidden just enough to pass through security without setting off alarms. He called up old locked folders, the ones only he and his lawyer had access to, and read again the note about his son's death, saw the signed forms that said the file was closed, remembered the night he had poured whiskey down his throat until he could no longer picture the small figure kneeling in the snow, then remembered how alone he had still felt the next morning when the hangover cleared, but the memory did not, and he knew now deep down that the only thing that had died back then was his courage. He sat there for a long time, the tower humming quietly around him, and then, with a sudden sharpness that made him feel almost young again, he stood up, grabbed his jacket and told himself, "You are not going to let the building swallow this boy like it swallowed the truth. You are going to look him in the eyes this time." The next morning the sky over the city was already heavy, low clouds pressing down, the Weather Channel in the cafeteria muttering about a record storm moving in, about rivers already swollen from weeks of rain, about flood warnings in red at the bottom of the screen. But people in suits walked past without looking, because disasters were for other places, not for clean glass towers with backup systems and plans on paper. Eli woke in the intern housing building to the sound of rain drumming steady on the windows, and for a moment thought he was back in the mountains during one of those long storms that turned dirt roads into rivers. But then he saw the gray high-rises outside and felt his heart pick up its pace. Not from the weather but from the memory of seeing Carter's face in person, hearing him talk about a dead son he thought he had buried, and knowing that somewhere above him, maybe only a few floors higher, that same man had his file open and his secret life in front of him. At breakfast some interns joked about the rain, about how they hoped the tower would not flood, about how it would make a cool story if we had to escape in boats, and Eli forced a small smile, but his mind was already walking through the building systems he had studied, thinking about drainage routes, lower levels, and how even the best designs could drown if the wrong combination of mistakes and bad luck hit at once. When he reached his floor, Jard met him at the door of the control room with a strange look, not angry but serious, as if he had been told something important. "The foundation director wants a word with you around lunch," Jard said, rubbing the back of his neck. "She said Mr. Hayes himself requested to meet a few of the interns one-on-one and your name is on the list." The air seemed to thin around Eli for a second. "Just me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "She said selected group," Jard answered, "but in the email it was only 3 names, you, a girl from the research wing and one from the finance side. It might be a good thing, kid. He doesn't usually even know interns exist." In Eli's chest his heart stuttered, the familiar jump that meant he had to breathe slow, and he turned away for a moment, pretending to study a screen while he pressed his palm against his ribs. He had come here hoping to get close enough to observe, to collect pieces of truth, but he had not expected the man at the top to pull him forward so quickly. "I'll be there," he said quietly, and his breath fogged the glass slightly as he watched rain streak down the windows on the far wall, growing thicker by the minute. Upstairs in a meeting room with a long table and big windows that looked out over the river, Carter paced before the time of the lunch session like a man waiting for a verdict, his stomach twisting in ways that expensive meals had never caused, while Jenna stood near the door with her tablet, glancing at him now and then with the wary respect of someone who knew her boss's temper but could see something different in his face today. "You sure you want to do this yourself?" she asked softly. "I can sit in." He shook his head. "No," he said, "it needs to be me." He thought of all the times he had let someone else carry the hard parts of his life, how he had hired people to tell lies for him and sign papers and talk to reporters and take blame when things went wrong, and he realized that this, at least, could not be handed off. If the boy downstairs was who he feared and hoped he was, then facing him was a job no one else could do. When the time came, Eli walked down the quiet hallway toward the meeting room with his badge swinging gently on his chest, and his heart pounding hard enough that he felt it in his throat, Lily walking beside him holding an umbrella she had forgotten to close, raindrops still clinging to the fabric like tiny mirrors. "You don't have to tell him anything you don't want to," she murmured as they approached the door. "You're here as an intern, not as a confession, remember that." He nodded, grateful for her presence, for the way she always seemed to know when he was carrying more than a stack of papers. The other two interns were already inside, sitting nervously at the table, cups of water before them. Carter stood at the far end, hands in his pockets, looking out at the river which looked higher than it had a few days before, fat and brown and fast. When he turned, his gaze moved over each face quickly until it landed on Eli, and this time there was no mistake, no easy moving on. His eyes stopped. They widened just a fraction, and something like recognition flickered through them before he smoothed his expression. The first few minutes of the meeting followed the usual script. Carter asked the other two interns about their goals, listened to their answers with the right amount of interest, gave small pieces of advice about hard work and thinking big. Eli barely heard any of it. His own voice sounded far away when Carter finally turned to him and said, "And you, Eli, from Pine Ridge, that's a long way from here. What brought you to this building?" The question was simple on the surface, but Eli heard all the hidden layers, the ones that asked, "How did you survive my decision? How did you slip past the grave I built for you and walk through my doors?" He took a breath that felt too shallow, then another, and met the man's eyes. "I grew up watching machines break and fix," he said slowly. "Engines, generators, hearts. I came here because your company touches a lot of the world I see on TV. And because some of the stories told about this place don't match the stories I carry." One of the other interns glanced at him in confusion. Carter's fingers tightened slightly on the back of a chair. "What kind of stories?" he asked, his voice quiet. Something in the room shifted. The rain outside beat harder on the glass, streaking down in thick lines. The river below looked like it was pushing against its banks. Eli could have stayed safe. He could have said something light, changed the subject, kept his secret. But he was tired of carrying it alone. "Stories about a man who had a son with a bad heart," he said, his own heart pounding against his ribs, "and about how that boy's life ended." The other interns went very still. Jenna looked from one face to the other, sensing something rising that was not in any schedule. Carter swallowed. "You read the articles," he said stiffly. "Yes," Eli replied, "but I also remember being 4 years old on a mountain road when the air was too thin for my chest and my father told me someone would come." His voice caught on that word, but he pushed through. "He drove away. A stranger in an old truck found me. She saved me. I didn't die in a hospital bed. I nearly died because someone decided I would ruin his life." The words hung in the room like lightning frozen in midair. One of the interns gasped quietly. Lily, standing near the door, covered her mouth, eyes wide. Carter's face drained of color, every polished line and careful expression stripped away, leaving a man who looked suddenly very human and very fragile. Who are you?" he whispered, though he already knew. Eli's pulse roared in his ears. "My name is Eli Cole," he said, "but before that, before the mountain, everyone called me Eli Hayes." Jenna took an involuntary step back. Lily reached for the door handle as if she might stop anyone from coming in and interrupting this moment. Outside, thunder rolled low and long, rattling the windows. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Carter did something none of them expected. He didn't deny it. He didn't call security. He didn't try to twist the story. He sank down slowly into the chair at the head of the table like a man whose legs could no longer hold him, his hands shaking as he pressed them together. "I thought you were dead," he said hoarsely. "I told myself you were. I paid people to make the papers say it. I told the world I did everything I could. But I left you there. I left you because I was afraid of what you would cost me. I built a building for sick kids and put your name on a plaque because it was easier than asking if you might still be out there." His eyes shone, and his voice broke in a way none of his staff had ever heard. "I have been living with a story where I am the man who tried his best and was hurt by fate. Hearing yours now, I see that I have been the storm." Eli's throat tightened. This was more than he expected, and yet not nearly enough. "You left me," he said, his voice shaking with anger and years of held-back hurt. "You told the world I died so they would feel sorry for you. You made money helping kids like me while the one you had was learning to breathe without you. Do you know what it feels like to grow up thinking maybe you were so broken that your own father needed you gone?" Carter flinched. "I know what it feels like to wake up every morning and hear your voice in my head," he said. "To see you on that road every time I close my eyes. I don't deserve your kindness and I don't expect your forgiveness. But I swear to you, if I had known you survived, I would have." "Would have what?" Eli cut in sharply. "Brought me back and told everyone you made a little mistake leaving your son on a mountain." The storm outside chose that moment to slam against the building with full force, wind howling, rain hitting the glass so hard it sounded like thrown gravel. Somewhere below, an alarm began to beep, faint at first, then louder, as if the building itself was reminding them that there were bigger forces at work than their broken history. Jenna's tablet buzzed with a flood alert. The river had spilled over its banks in several places, water pushing into streets, drains already overwhelmed. Down in the lower levels, sensors triggered red lights as the first trickles began to find their way into service tunnels and storage rooms. The city's neat lines were blurring under rushing brown water. A voice crackled over the building intercom, breaking into the tense silence of the meeting room. "Attention all staff and visitors," it said. "Due to extreme flooding in the river district, we are initiating Level 2 flood protocols. Please remain calm and await instructions from your floor wardens. Operations and building systems teams report to your stations immediately." Jard's voice came through Eli's work phone at the same time, sharp and tight. "Where are you?" he asked. "We've got water readings in the sub-basement, higher than they should be. Pumps are lagging. If the backup generators get hit, we'll lose power to half the building, including the research center and the pediatric wing." Eli felt his stomach drop. He had studied those blueprints. He knew the paths water would take if it found the wrong gap. "I'm with Mr. Hayes," he said, glancing at Carter, who was now staring at the river through the glass, watching the water climb the embankments. "I need to get downstairs." Lily stepped forward, already pulling up schematics on her tablet. "The main flood doors should have closed by now," she said, frowning. "If they didn't, there's a jam. Someone has to get to the manual override. It's in the lower maintenance hall right by the generator room." She looked at Eli. "You're the only intern who knows that system. But you're also the only one whose heart shouldn't be anywhere near a flooded basement." Before Eli could answer, Carter stood up, something fierce lighting in his eyes, different from the cold drive that usually powered him. "I know those halls too," he said. "I walked them with the architects. If there's a jam, we fix it now." Jenna stared at him. "Sir, security will handle this," she said quickly. "You should go to the safe floor." He shook his head, already moving toward the door. "I have spent years giving speeches about how much we care," he replied. "If this building fails and people get hurt, my name is on that failure. I am not hiding in a safe floor while everyone else goes down there." He looked at Eli, and for the first time the line between CEO and father blurred in his face. "You said you came here because you know systems," he said. "Come with me, tell me what to do, I won't leave you again." The words hit Eli with confusing force. Part of him wanted to scream that he did not owe this man another chance, that he could let the tower drown and walk away clean, but another part, the one that had grown up beside a woman who rushed toward broken engines and broken people instead of backing away, knew that if he could help and chose not to, the regret would sit beside his old pain and make a heavy pile he might never lift. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart stutter, then steady. "Fine," he said, "but we do it my way. We move slow. When I say I need to stop, we stop. You don't get to decide how much my body can take anymore." Carter nodded without hesitation. "Agreed," he said, and for once that word did not feel like a business term. They took a staff elevator down, Lily coming with them despite Jenna's protest, saying someone had to coordinate with operations from the inside. The deeper the elevator went, the more they could feel the vibration of pumps working hard, the rush of water in unseen pipes, the faint shudder when something heavy hit against a flood door. When the doors opened, the air was different, damp, cool, tinged with the smell of wet concrete and metal. Water already slicked the floor in shallow streams flowing toward drains that gurgled in protest. Alarm lights flashed red along the walls. "Levels?" Carter asked, his voice tight. Lily glanced at her tablet. "Rising fast in Tunnel 3, she said. "Flood doors 2 and 4 closed. Flood door 3 is stuck halfway. If it fails completely, the generator room is going to take a hit." Eli's mind snapped into focus the way it always did around machines. Fear slid to the edge for a moment, pushed back by the familiar need to solve a problem before something broke beyond repair. "Door 3 manual override is past the first junction," he said, pointing. "We have to go through the lower maintenance hall. There's a stairwell at the end. The control box is mounted above shoulder height. We might have to crank it by hand if the motor flooded." Water lapped around their ankles as they moved, cold and insistent. The deeper they went, the higher it climbed, swirling with bits of debris. Eli's breath quickened. He pressed his hand to his chest, counting silently. 1, 2, 3 in. 1, 2, 3 out. Carter stayed on his left, close enough to steady him if he slipped, his expensive shoes already ruined, his suit pants dark with water. At the first bend, a sudden rush came from a side tunnel as a pipe gave way, sending a wave down the hall. It hit them at knee height, almost knocking Eli off his feet. He stumbled, his heart slamming against his ribs, feeling the old familiar burn in his lungs. Carter grabbed his arm, holding him upright. "We turn back," he said immediately, panic flashing in his eyes. "This is too dangerous." Eli shook his head, teeth clenched. "If we turn back, the generators flood," he gasped. "If they go, the pediatric wing loses power. The research center too. There are kids up there hooked to machines. I know what that feels like. We can't leave them." The thought of children lying in beds the way he once had, breathing with the help of wires and soft beeps, made the water around his legs feel less important. He pushed forward one step at a time, and for the first time Carter followed his lead instead of dragging him toward safety. They reached the stairwell and climbed the first few steps, water sloshing beneath them. At the landing, a metal door groaned under pressure, water seeping through the bottom. "That's flood door 3, Lily said, her voice tight as she checked the panel on the wall. "It's stuck between open and closed, the motor shorted. If it fails fully, the pressure will blow it and we'll be swimming." "Control box?" Eli asked, squinting in the dim emergency light. Lily pointed to a metal panel about a foot above Carter's head. "There." Eli took a breath and stepped forward, but his vision swam black spots at the edges. His heart monitor buzzed angrily at his wrist. His body was close to its limit. "I can't reach and hold myself steady," he admitted, hatting the words but knowing that pretending would only get them killed. Carter stepped under the panel. "Tell me what to do," he said, voice steady now with a different kind of determination. "I'll be your hands." Eli nodded, focusing on the box instead of the memory of how those hands had once turned a steering wheel away from him. "Open the panel," he said. "There should be a manual crank inside, like a metal wheel. Turn it counterclockwise, slowly. It will lift the door." Carter yanked the panel open, revealing wires, gears, and a heavy steel wheel. He grabbed it and began to turn. At first it wouldn't budge. He grunted, muscles straining, the old arrogance burned away by simple physical effort. "It's stuck," he gasped. "Keep going," Eli urged, his voice sharp. "The flood sensors are already screaming. If that door stays like this, the water will find every gap." With a loud groan, the wheel finally shifted. Upstairs in the operations room, Jard watched on a screen as the sensor for door 3 showed a tiny change in angle. "Someone on it," he muttered, eyes flicking between numbers. The flood levels in the generator hall paused, then climbed more slowly. Back in the stairwell, Carter kept turning, his shoulders burning, water now up to their mid-calf as it pushed under the door. Eli sank onto the step for a moment, breathing hard, the roar of water and the creak of metal mixing with the pounding in his head. "Almost there," Lily said, watching the small manual gauge. Come on, come on!" With one last heave, Carter felt the wheel give, then lock into place with a heavy clunk. The groaning of the door stopped. The water seeping in began to slow, then almost stop. The pressure had equalized. The worst of the rush was being held back. But the victory came with a price. A sudden metallic shriek echoed overhead as something in the ceiling failed under the stress of shifting water. A crack opened in the concrete above them, sending a sheet of cold water down onto the stairwell. It hit with enough force to knock Eli sideways. He slipped on the wet step and went under for a second, the world spinning cold and blue and loud. Strong hands grabbed him under the arms and hauled him back up, dragging him higher onto the stairs as water poured in below, filling the lower hall like a rising pool. "I've got you," Carter shouted over the noise, his voice raw and urgent. "I've got you, Eli, I'm not letting go." The words hit deeper than the water. Eli coughed, choking, his chest on fire, his heart beat a wild drum. He felt dizzy, distant, the edges of the world blurred. Lily slapped the emergency call button on the wall. "We need medical and a rescue team at stairwell 12 now," she yelled into the speaker. "We stabilized door 3, but we're trapped on the landing with rising water and a critical heart patient. Move!" Upstairs, alarms shifted. People in bright vests moved toward the stairwell. On the pediatric floor, nurses checked their backup lines, grateful to see that the power had held steady. One of them glanced out the window at the brown river below and said quietly, "Thank you, whoever you are." The water in the stairwell reached the landing before slowing. They were high enough now that it did not cover them, but going back down was impossible. Going up was the only way out. Carter gathered Eli in his arms as if he were 4 years old again, only this time there was no cold calculation in his grip, only fear and something that looked like love. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the boy's wet hair as he started to climb slowly, each step a struggle with wet clothes and aching muscles. "I am so sorry. I was a coward. I thought my fear mattered more than your life. If we get out of this, if you let me have even a piece of your future, I will spend every breath I have trying to make that choice the worst thing I ever did, not the last thing." Eli heard the words as if through glass. his mind spinning between the present and that old image of red taillights vanishing in snow, and part of him wanted to push away to say, too late, but his body had no strength left for fights. All he could do was listen and breathe and hope his heart, which had fought through so much, would keep going a little longer. They were halfway up when the rescue team met them, crashing through a door from an upper floor with ropes and stretchers and bright lights. Hands took Eli from Carter, laying him gently on a board, wrapping a blanket around his shaking body even as his clothes dripped. A mask pressed over his face, cool oxygen flowing. Voices called out numbers, pulse, oxygen level, water depth below. Someone clapped Carter on the shoulder, saying, "If you hadn't hit that override, sir, we'd be hauling bodies out of the generator hall instead of damp interns out of stairwells." He barely heard them. All his attention was on the boy being carried up ahead of him, on the pale face and closed eyes, and the way the heart monitor attached to his wrist flashed warning colors. They moved him straight from the stairwell to the tower's connected clinic, then rushed him by covered walkway to the children's hospital wing that Hayes Money had rebuilt years before. As they wheeled the stretcher across the bridge, the flood still raged below. Streets turned into rivers, cars half submerged, people on rooftops waiting for boats. News helicopters hovered in the distance, cameras capturing images of water swirling at the base of the very tower that had always seemed too tall to touch. Somewhere far away in a small town at the edge of the mountains, Hannah stood in front of an old television in the shop, her hand over her mouth, as a news anchor said, "Breaking. Record floods hit the river district, including the headquarters of Hayes Property Group. Early reports say a disaster may have been avoided inside the tower thanks to quick action from staff, including an intern from a rural town." The reporter mispronounced Pine Ridge slightly, but the name Eli came through clear, and the camera caught for just a second a shot of a stretcher crossing a glass bridge. Hannah saw the shape under the blanket, the dark hair, the way the figure clutched a small stuffed dinosaur to his chest, and her knees nearly gave out. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and called Lucas, who was working at a garage in a nearby city, his own TV showing the same flood footage. "We're going," she said, her voice steady only because sheer focus held it in place. "Now." They drove for hours through backroads and detours, passing fields turned into lakes, listening to the radio talk about levees breaking and emergency shelters filling. At the same time, in a quiet apartment on the opposite side of the city, a woman named Riley sat at her small kitchen table, staring at a stack of worn photographs of a boy with big brown eyes and a stuffed dinosaur, the boy she had been told had died years ago. She watched the news too, not because of the flood, but because the special report promised a live statement from Hayes Tower once the worst had passed, and she had long ago made a habit of watching anytime Carter appeared on screen, as if punishing herself for not fighting harder back then. The hospital room where they placed Eli was bright and white and full of soft beeping, a strange echo of the rooms he had known as a small child. Doctors and nurses moved around him with practiced speed, checking his heart, lungs, temperature, talking with Dr. Miller over a video call from Pine Ridge about his history, and the best way to calm a heart that had been dragged through cold water and terror. When the storm outside finally began to ease and the flood levels stopped their violent climb, he lay in a half-sleep, his body exhausted, his mind floating between faces, Hannah's, Lucas's, Lily's, Carter's younger and older, his mother's blurred smile from long-ago memories. He woke fully to the sound of a quiet argument in the hallway, voices he knew and voices he had almost forgot. "I don't care how important he is, you don't get to decide who sees that boy," Hannah was saying, her voice rough like gravel. "I'm the one who picked him up off a road when you rich people were nowhere to be found. I'm going in there." "She has every right," another voice added, trembling but strong. "I am his mother." That voice made Eli's chest ache with a different kind of pain. He had heard it in lullabies and tired sighs and whispered prayers years ago, before the mountain, before the flood, before any of this. Riley stepped into the room first, looking smaller than he remembered but with the same eyes, the same worry carved into the lines of her face. Hannah came right behind her, her hair still damp from the rain outside, oil still under her nails, Lucas at her shoulder like a quiet wall. And then, seconds later, Carter appeared in the doorway too, his suit replaced by simple clothes someone had given him at the hospital, his face older than it had looked that morning, his eyes raw. For a moment all four adults stood there, the past and present colliding around the hospital bed where the boy they had all touched and failed and saved lay with wires on his chest and a dinosaur in his arms. Eli's heart monitor beeped steadily, reminding them that this was no grave, no empty box with a neat plaque. He was here, alive, watching. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough. "Guess the flood found all of us at once." It broke the tension enough that everyone moved at once. Hannah crossed the room in 3 long steps and gripped his hand. "You scared me more than any busted engine ever has," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You know that?" He squeezed back weakly. "I didn't invite the river," he murmured. "It crashed the party." Riley stepped closer, her hands shaking. "Eli," she said softly, tasting the name like something precious she thought she would never say again. "My baby." He turned his head, studying her face, the years that had passed since he last saw her bending over his bed in a smaller house, hiding worry behind a brave smile. "They told you I died," he said, not accusing, just stating the fact they both knew. She nodded, her eyes filling. "He told me there were complications," she whispered, glancing briefly at Carter. "He told me you were gone, that I didn't get to see you, that it was better for me that way. I was broken. I believed him because I didn't know how not to. I should have fought harder. I should have asked questions. I am so sorry." Carter flinched at every word. He stepped into the room fully now, seeming smaller than he ever had in a boardroom, his shoulders slumped under a weight he could no longer pretend was a noble burden. "It was my choice," he said quietly. "She trusted me. I lied to both of you. I thought if I carried all the blame, if I made myself the one who signed the papers and told the story, then somehow the world would stay neat. It didn't. It just spread the hurt around. I know I don't deserve to stand in this room, but I am here because I want you to hear from my own mouth that what happened on that mountain was real, that your pain is not something you imagined. I left you, Eli. Hannah, you found him, you saved him. Riley, you mourned a child who wasn't dead. And he swallowed hard. I built walls of money and good deeds around a rotten choice and called it redemption. Today in that basement, I saw what real redemption begins to look like. It looks like turning toward danger instead of away. It looks like trusting your son instead of hiding him. It looks like carrying him upstairs even when your legs are shaking. I am late, so late, but I am asking you all to let me start again." The room fell quiet. Machines hummed softly. Rain tapped gently against the window now, the storm's anger spent. Eli felt tears on his own face and didn't bother to wipe them away. He thought about the mountain road, the clinic, the cabin, the shop, the tower, the stairwell, the flood, all the places his life had stretched across because of one man's fear and other people's courage. He looked at Hannah, who had taught him that family could be built from choices instead of blood. He looked at Riley, who had carried love for a ghost all these years. He looked at Carter, who had finally said the words he had needed to hear, not as excuses but as confession. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said honestly, his voice shaking but clear. "Not yet, maybe not fully ever, but I also don't want to spend the rest of my life letting your worst moment define every one of mine. The flood could have taken all of this, it didn't. So here's what I can give you right now. I won't pretend you're dead to me. I won't pretend I don't want to know why you were the way you were. You can be in my life, but you don't get to own it. You show up. You listen. You fix what you can. You don't ask me to make you feel better. You do the hard work yourself." Tears slid down Carter's face, cutting clean lines through the dried salt from earlier. He nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sentence he knew he deserved. "That's more than I thought I'd ever get," he whispered. "I will take it and try to be someone who deserves even that." Hannah squeezed Eli's hand. "Whatever you decide, you don't lose us," she said firmly. "You don't trade one family for another, we just make a bigger table." Riley let out a shaky laugh sob at that. "I would like that," she said. "If you want it, Eli, I would like to sit at that table sometimes and hear about the years I missed." He looked at her and then at Hannah, at Lucas leaning in the doorway like a quiet guard, and something warm spread in his chest, easing the tight spots. "We can make more chairs," he said softly. "We've been doing that our whole lives." In the weeks that followed, as the city cleaned mud from streets and counted the cost of the flood, the story of what had happened inside Hayes Tower during the worst of it spread. At first, the news channels focused on the dramatic images: water swirling around the base of the skyscraper, staff in bright vests guiding people to higher floors, generators staying on when other buildings went dark. Then someone leaked details from operations: how Flood Door 3 had nearly failed, how an intern from a mountain town and the CEO himself had gone into the flooded hall to crank the manual override by hand. There were interviews, requests for statements, chances for Carter to polish the story again and stand alone in the light as a hero who saved his building. He surprised everyone, including himself, by refusing. At a press conference a month later, standing in front of the very plaque that had once turned his son into a neat tragedy, he spoke into cameras with Eli standing a few steps to the side, Hannah and Riley in the front row, Lily and Jard behind them. "You've heard that I went down there," he said. "That I helped turn the crank, that is true, but it is not the whole truth. The person who saw the problem before most of us knew there was one, the person who knew exactly where to go and what to do, the person whose own heart gave him every excuse to stay safe and yet still chose to go toward the danger was not me, it was this young man." He gestured to Eli, who stiffened in surprise. "His name is Eli. Years ago I failed him in a way that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I won't share every detail today because some wounds are not for strangers to pull apart. But I will say this, I lied to the world about my loss. I told a story where I did everything I could and fate was cruel. The flood showed me that the truth is messier. I was the one who was cruel. Fate, or grace, or whatever you want to call it, is what brought my son back under this roof." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters' pens flew. Questions rose. "Are you saying your son is alive?" someone shouted. "Did you abandon him?" asked another. Carter lifted a hand. "Yes," he said simply. "He is alive. I abandoned him. There are no words that excuse that. I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me or to make myself look brave. I am telling you because this building, this company, this foundation will change from today on. We will stop hiding behind perfect stories. We will stop smoothing out the ugly parts to make them easier to sell. We will fund more clinics like the one in Pine Ridge where strangers pick kids up off roads and decide they are worth saving. And I will spend the rest of my life listening to my son, not just speaking about him." The cameras turned to Eli, lenses reflecting his face back 100 times. He could have looked down, he could have walked away. Instead, he took a small step forward, his heart beating steady in his chest. "I didn't come here to become part of a news story," he said, his voice carrying farther than he expected. "I came because I was tired of running from a past I didn't choose. The flood wasn't some magic fix, it didn't wash everything clean. I still remember the mountain. I still remember what it felt like to watch a car drive away. But I also remember what it felt like when a truck stopped, when a woman I didn't know carried me into a clinic, when a doctor learned my name, when a mechanic taught me that broken things can work again. I remember what it felt like when the man who left me turned around in a flooded stairwell and said, 'I'm not letting go this time. I don't know how this story ends yet, we're still writing it. But I do know this, you can't build a good future on lies, even shiny ones. You have to tell the truth, even when it makes you look small. You have to choose people over pride, over money, over fear. If you don't, the flood will come one day and show everyone what's under the surface.'" The clip went viral in days. People around the world argued in comments about whether they would forgive a father like that, about what they would have done in Eli's place, about how many times someone deserved a second chance. Some called Eli foolish for letting Carter into his life at all. Others called him strong for setting boundaries and still choosing not to be eaten alive by hate. In Pine Ridge, kids pointed at the TV and said, "He's from here," and the old clinic hung a small photo of Eli beside the reception desk, a quiet reminder that sometimes the world noticed mountain towns. In the city, the research center added a new line under the plaque, dedicated not to the memory of a life lost but to the courage of a life reclaimed. Years later, when the river rose again in another storm, the tower and the neighborhood around it were ready. New levees held, floodgates closed smoother. Rural clinics had better equipment because of funding that came with fewer strings and more listening. In an office that looked out over both the city and a live feed from mountain weather stations, a young engineer with a heart scar running along his chest and a small dinosaur sitting on his desk watched numbers climb and fall, sending calm messages to teams in low-lying areas, his voice steady as he guided them because he had learned long ago what happens when people ignore warnings, when they pretend they are stronger than nature, than truth, than love. He signed his reports Eli Cole Hayes now, a name that owned both his past and his present. On the anniversaries of the flood, he sometimes went back to the mountain road with Hannah, Lucas, Riley, and eventually a much quieter Carter. They would stand where the SUV once stopped, where the rusty truck once did, where the water once threatened to climb too high, and they would not pretend it had been anything other than what it was. A terrible choice, a strange rescue, a beginning they hadn't understood. Then they would drive back down together, arguing over music, sharing snacks, laughing over stories that had nothing to do with heart monitors or floods or towers, Because life, he had learned, is not just the big dramatic moments but also the small, steady ones between them. And every time he lay down at night and put a hand on his chest to feel the beat that had survived snow and fear and water, he whispered a quiet promise, not to his father, not to the world, but to the boy he had once been on that cold road. I will not leave you, I will choose you, every single day. If this story touched your heart, ask yourself honestly. If you were in Eli's shoes, would you let someone like Carter back into your life, even a little, or would you walk away for good? Tell us in the comments what you think and where you're watching from, because your voice matters here more than any polished speech. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel to support our growth so you never miss more life-changing stories like this one.